All you gotta do is relax, sit back. Let me tell a little story. I used to love sports, baseball and basketball. Actually, I lied. I hated baseball. I love basketball and football. Running track, yes sir, run it back. All day sports was the best thing.
Hello and welcome to another wholesome, homeful, just all around American and wonderful edition of the Coin Toss podcast. Did you know, Christian, that the USA are world champs?
What was the first word you said?
You know, that's not important right now because it wasn't a word. And I don't have a dictionary. Do I look like a dictionary?
I'm sorry about that. Yes, World Champs Parade, New York. Great, right?
It was parade in LA too.
Oh,
Well, not a parade, but they had a thing in LA Live, which I wish I'd heard about because I probably would have tried to go to it. So yeah, USA beat Japan emphatically. But you know what else? USA played Japan in American football today at the IFAF American Football World Championships.
Of course, the EFAF.
In Canton, Ohio. And I didn't watch the game, so I don't know what the score was.
I'm guessing it was 200 billion to 2.
I wouldn't sleep on the Japanese when it comes to American football because apparently they're very well regarded in Asia amongst other Asian countries like Australia and stuff like that.
I wouldn't doubt it. They're very industrious people.
So it's the middle of July,
Mm-hmm.
and we got a lot of baseball going on, Christian. Talk
Yeah.
about your Mets. They've been doing good.
Well, what's fascinating to me right now is that football isn't grabbing the headlines. What with NBA offseason and with Major League Baseball going in full swing. My New York Mets, who some of you may not care about, and that's okay, are in the midst of winning 5 of their last 7 games, and they are doing quite well despite having most of their battery in the middle of the lineup down in the designated list. It's been a fun season for baseball fans, especially in Southern California. Both the Dodgers and the Angels seem to be doing pretty well. But we're heading into the All-Star break, which means this is the slowest time of the sports season. And what's been piquing your interest? Has the NBA offseason been crowding your Twitter feed /
Yes.
mental space?
Well, not my Twitter feed because I leave it up to the good people of Reddit / NBA to post the tweets that I would care about. But yes, the NBA offseason, nobody thought we could top LeBron going home. But DeAndre Jordan and the Mavericks, well, not topping that, certainly in like a media spectacle sort of sense, has certainly been at least as entertaining.
Yeah, last year when I think it was Doc Rivers who made the statement that DeAndre Jordan has been playing like Wilt Chamberlain, now he's getting the attention that Wilt Chamberlain got in the 1960s. And I'm not entirely sure why. This is a guy who averages 9 points and 8 rebounds for his career. Well, the fascination around the DeAndre Jordan story, while meriting the discussion it's been getting because of its high-level drama, it's revolving around a not that stellar player.
Well, certainly. I mean, he's a defensive anchor, certainly. But he was the best free agent on the market when LaMarcus Aldridge went to the Spurs, as everybody pretty much had figured out that he was going to do. So I would say that he was the biggest free agent that was still sort of undecided. And then we think he's going to sign with the Mavericks. You know, apparently Dirk came back early from a family trip to be like, hey, you know, let's go, let's do this. Chandler Parsons went out to dinner with him like 5 times because apparently Chandler was saying like he wants to be a GM because of all the fun stuff he got to do recruiting DeAndre Jordan. But I don't think he felt that way after DeAndre changed his mind. Really.
So who do you think looks the worst out of this entire mess? Is it Mark Cuban for not sealing the deal? Is it DeAndre for his, quote, unprofessionalism, unquote? It's the NBA. I don't care about professionalism so much. Is it Chandler Parsons for coming out with the salt afterwards? Is it the Clippers for being nonchalant about letting DeAndre go and then executing a coup d'etat to get him back? Who came out the worst?
I would say, like, if you were looking for a person to be called the worst, and I agree with you that this is the NBA, and it certainly doesn't have the same standards of professionalism that most other multi-million-dollar fields would have. But I think DeAndre, honestly, because he came out looking kind of, waffly. Like he could be swayed easily by, like, apparently, which what Chandler Parsons said was that DeAndre was talking about how he wanted to be the guy and he didn't want to have to, rely on people like Chris Paul and Blake Griffin. He felt that, he was being held back a little bit, and that's not where he wanted to be. So, yeah, it does kind of scratch your head a little bit. From a player perspective, you kind of want to gamble on yourself if you think you're that good so that you can be the franchise guy, and which eventually will lead to the most money and, the most fame probably. But I think what really happened was that he realized that the Clippers are the best team he's going to be on in his career, and he fits the best on that team out of any team he's ever going to play on. So I think that was the line of thinking, and certainly, Paul Pierce and Chris Paul and Doc Rivers showing up at his house, I mean, that probably swayed him a little bit just to get it done. But I don't think anybody looks off particularly horrible, except for Chris Broussard, maybe.
Oh, my goodness.
You talk about Chris Broussard, Christian.
I don't, if that's okay. Chris Broussard is a wonderful journalist. He has the inside scoop on the NBA. He's not Woj, but he's probably second tier in regards to NBA insiders. He likes to stick his nose in other people's business, though, man. I understand his values. He has a faith-based moral system, and he likes to spread it. And that's unprofessional. If we're talking about true unprofessionalism in the NBA, the reporters who should be acting like reporters, instead, Chris Broussard likes to spread his ideals too much. Not a big fan of his work.
Well, yeah, and neither is Mark Cuban, who took issue with many of Chris Broussard's tweets about how Mark Cuban was desperately driving around Houston trying to find DeAndre Jordan's house. And I can see why Mark Cuban wouldn't enjoy that, because he doesn't take that kind of talk from anybody, really. Well, he doesn't feel like he has to put up with that, obviously, because I'm Mark Cuban,
Okay. What do you think Mark Cuban drives? He's in Houston.
Well, first of all, he doesn't drive. Second of all, I don't know. Do you think he's the kind of billionaire that drives himself around?
I do, actually. And I don't imagine him in like a Lotus or a McLaren or one of those high-powered muscle cars. I imagine him in like a roofless Jeep driving around Houston trying to find DeAndre Jordan. A white roofless Jeep.
That would be a sight to see. But you know what? If he were in a white roofless Jeep, anybody could see him, and somebody would have posted on Twitter, here's Mark Cuban driving around Houston.
But Mark Cuban looks like a very generic white guy, though. Like, we see his face, we know what Mark Cuban looks like. But if this was the NFL and he wore a helmet for a living, he looks like a generic white guy, no?
He does look pretty generic, especially with his fashion sense. But we're not here to talk about Mark Cuban's fashion sense. We're here to talk about ethics in sports journalism.
I don't want to. No, but,
not really.
But here's the thing. This is an entertainment league. The NBA is about entertainment. When we start putting our moral values that we apply in the American workplace on our entertainment brands, they become so much more boring, so much less interesting. I've been hearing discussion about the NBA Players Union and how they negotiated this moratorium. They give players a week to think about their decisions from the beginning of free agency to the time when teams can officially sign them.
Those contracts can be officially inked for a whole week.
I think it's good for the players because it allows them to change their mind. The system worked. DeAndre Jordan had a change of heart. This moratorium that his players union negotiated for him allowed him to change his mind without any financial repercussions. Good for the players union. Now, this was entertaining, no? This was fun to watch. For a few days, the NBA, which hasn't been playing any games, was the biggest story in the country. this is what you want if you're the NBA's PR department, no?
Yes, I agree with that. And it got them on the front page of the sports section when they had no business being on the front page of the sports section. And because after the draft, there's only like what, summer league, and well, I admit that I've been taking more of an interest in summer league than I ever have been before, just because I'm interested in this draft class. It's not quite the product that official NBA basketball is.
We got stories that DeAndre Jordan and the Clippers, their entire brass, Steve Ballmer, Doc Rivers, Chris Paul, were all in DeAndre's house, barricading the doors so Mark Cuban and any Dallas Mavericks official couldn't get in. Now,
And even DeAndre Jordan's agent as well, who will probably end up getting rid of.
do you want that story, or do you want the more genteel, polite American way of doing business? That's not a story we want to hear. This is the WWE sort of storytelling that we crave from our entertainment brands. And anybody who wants anything that resembles the American way of negotiation is a fun killer. And they should not be watching the NBA.
I like how you brought up that the NBA is an entertainment league, because while being, I believe, second or probably third to the NFL in terms of overall sports revenue.
I believe they're third, yes.
Yeah, it's football, baseball, basketball. Basketball players are the most recognized sports personalities by far, for several reasons. Obviously, they play on the court, not wearing any obscuring gear like football players do. They play a game that young people love, unlike baseball players. And, if you do a survey across all the sports, NBA players have the most Twitter followers on average by far. So that's what we got. We got entertainment in our entertainment league. And it was told through all these wonderful little social media things like Instagram and Paul Pierce's little thing on the Players Tribune where he summed it up in emojis. Like, there was an emoji festival with Kobe doing his little trophy emojis and saying Mamba out to give his take on the situation. It was hilarious, and it was really, really fun.
And by the way, Mark Cuban sent his thoughts over his own internet platform. I can't remember what it's called. Something Dust.
You can't remember what it's called because nobody uses it except Mark Cuban.
That's problematic. But the point that I was getting at was this is the best free advertising for that product that Mark Cuban's ever gotten. Yeah, he had to lose a lot of face and lose a franchise player potentially in order to get that info out. But as a shrewd businessman, the silver lining in this is the name's now out. I can't remember it. Oh, this would have been a much better point if I had remembered the name of that thing.
But I do remember that there was a thing, so that certainly does help.
First step.
So, DeAndre Jordan is back with the Clippers. Where do you see the Clippers in the Western Conference this coming year?
They beat the Spurs last year. And here's the thing. The Clippers were an errant bounce away from being bounced in the first round. And they were also potentially an errant bounce away from getting to the Western Conference Finals. We don't really have an idea of the ceiling the Clippers could attain, because they have Chris Paul, who is probably the best point guard in the game. They have Blake Griffin, who was talked about as an MVP candidate a year ago. And they have DeAndre Jordan, who apparently is Wilt Chamberlain all of a sudden again. But beyond that, they haven't changed all that much.
Yeah, they did get Paul Pierce, everybody's favorite. I called game Paul Pierce, and I that was probably my favorite moment of the entire playoffs. I called game because I remember watching that live, and I jumped out of my seat because it was so amazing. So I hope Paul Pierce brings that to LA. They also got Lance Stevenson, who was a bit of a gamble because his year in Charlotte was awful. In almost every way.
The trouble with Lance Stevenson is that he's coming at a price that may require the Clippers to sacrifice Jamal Crawford. So
I think they were thinking about moving on from him anyway, though.
Yeah, and not sure whether that's the best idea or not, but if you're getting 2012, 2013 Lance Stevenson, that's a no-brainer. Because 2012, 2013 Lance Stevenson was churning out triple-doubles like no one's ever seen. But that's a risky play. And right now, I'm not sure that an upgrade to your sixth man is enough to compete against the Golden State Warriors, who are still historically good, and the San Antonio Spurs, who all of a sudden look like they're going to win 72 games next year.
Yeah, I really want to see LaMarcus Aldridge on the Spurs because I didn't see all that much of him because he was playing on Portland, while Portland certainly not being a backwater. It's not on the top list of NBA teams that they put on national TV all the time. But the Spurs get on TV all the time, and especially with LaMarcus Aldridge, there's going to be in some marquee matchups come Christmas time that I definitely want to see. But as far as the Eastern Conference goes, Cleveland's got to be the favorite, right?
Yeah, there's no other competition clearly in the East. If Chicago couldn't have gotten it done last year without their coach and with most of their players on high mileage, how on earth are they going to compete with Cleveland?
Yeah, it's funny because when you're trying to think of the number 2 team in the East, I would say probably Washington, because John Wall is a basketball savant, and I love watching John Wall play because he spins around everybody, and he makes plays all the time.
Wall and Beal are a pretty phenomenal backcourt.
And, we got to see what Derrick Rose does next year, because he did, I would say he ended the season pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
He played pretty well in the playoffs. Milwaukee is not going to go very far next year, but I want to see them play because Milwaukee is a fun team to watch with a lot of young players who could be real big.
Milwaukee will be interesting. I think they're going to be a perennial playoff team for the next 5 or 6 years. One team I would reconsider looking at, and this could be a terrible prediction, but I wouldn't sleep on Indiana right now because they're getting a healthy Paul George right now. And there aren't a lot of number 1 go-to players in the Eastern Conference right now. And pre-leg destruction, Paul George was in the conversation of a top 5 player in the NBA. I think his healthy return might boost Indiana into playoff position. And with how weak the East is, they might be a little more competitive than some will argue.
Yeah, and they did get rid of Roy Hibbert and put him onto the Los Angeles Lakers. Woo, go Lakers! And they did, I believe their first-round draft pick was a big man who's looked pretty good in the Summer League play I've seen from him so far, but then again, it is Summer League. So, yeah, I have definitely watched Indiana. Toronto seems to be going almost nowhere. I don't know if they're going to keep their coach. Lou Williams is gone, also to the Lakers. I don't really see them breaking much further than the first round.
Yeah, Toronto swung and missed on a few free agents. They thought they were going to get Wesley Matthews. They thought they had a shot at LaMarcus Aldridge. Nothing's really working out in their favor. I guess Drake and the rest of October's very own isn't the same attraction that they thought they were going to get. We'll see. The NBA starts in November, I want to say. It should start in January, but we have a few
late
months.
October, actually.
Late October?
Yeah, like around Halloween. No, a little before Halloween.
Way too early. We don't need 82 games of basketball. That's a very diminished product.
Oh, and you know what? The season is going to be longer this year because I believe they're cutting 4 preseason games and using that time to stretch out the season a little more to eliminate back-to-backs. And yeah, like you said, we don't need 82 games of basketball. But the owners sure do love 82 games of revenue.
Sure.
And especially for the small markets like Milwaukee and places like that.
Basketball, I think, is the most predictable of the 4 major sports. How quickly did the entire country conclude that Golden State was the best team last year? It didn't take 82 games plus 4 playoff series to figure out that Golden State was the best.
Yeah, it took about 30 games.
We knew they were the best. Now, it's not the hockey playoffs where strange things happen. Strange things did happen in this year's playoffs, but the best teams usually make it into the finals.
Yeah, that's just kind of how basketball works out, really, because unlike hockey, there's a lot of scoring. And so if you put 2 teams in a 7-game series, it's quite unlikely that the team that's not quite as good will beat the better team because that's just the way it works, really. Like, you can be like Milwaukee last year where they had 2 quality wins against Chicago, but they need to do that 4 times, not twice.
Mhm.
So you're not going to get too many surprises in the NBA. Oh, one thing that I just remembered when we forgot to talk about when we were talking about baseball. Clayton Kershaw is on the All-Star team now.
Yes, he is.
Hooray! And I think Dodger fans we love our pitchers and we hate our pitchers because on one hand we've got Greinke and Kershaw, who, especially Greinke, are just striking out everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have guys like Mike Bolsinger, who we got to see pitch against the Mets and give up, I don't know, a dozen hits or something like that.
13 hits in 6 innings, I believe.
Yeah, and so the Dodgers' pitching rotation is a little schizophrenic, but I believe you mentioned that a couple of their guys are hurt. Right
now. Hyunjin Ryu, the product from South Korea, who also attracts the largest amount of Dodger fans to his home games. I believe had Tommy John earlier this season, so he's out for the year. And Brandon McCarthy, who is one of the most revered pitchers in sabermetric circles, also has the absolute funniest Twitter account of any sports person on earth.
Really? That's quite a statement.
You need to right now subscribe to 2 Twitter accounts. You need to subscribe to Brandon McCarthy's Twitter account and Fernando Tatis's Twitter account. I'm almost positive Fernando Tatis does not run the Fernando Tatis Twitter account. Trust me, you will love both of them. Anyway, Brandon McCarthy, who is best known for suffering a debilitating head injury when he got a comebacker about 100 miles an hour to his head a couple years ago, I believe is out with a leg injury. And when you deplete half the pitching staff in a very, very pitching-friendly league that the NL West is, you are going to struggle along the way. But the Dodgers are still in first place. The Giants are lagging back. The Diamondbacks are not precipitously falling, but they are struggling to keep up. It just doesn't feel like the Dodgers are gaining any attention in this city. It feels like this city expects a lot more than a division win.
Yes, that is certainly true. And I remember that YouTube channel that used to film the Dodger games, Dodger Films. I remember at the beginning of the season, he predicted 103 wins for the Dodgers. I don't think they're going to get quite that far.
No.
But, people in LA with Kershaw and Puig, they are expecting a title at some point. And it has been a while. I believe it was 88 the last time the Dodgers won the World Series.
1988.
And this hasn't been their best regular season with this current group so far.
But the dirty little secret about baseball is that it has the longest regular season and the shortest postseason of the 4 major professional sports. Nothing you do in the regular season will matter come playoff time. Because if it's been shown in recent years, if you have 2 lockdown starters, you're golden. And they do have 2 lockdown starters in Kershaw and Greinke. Now, Kershaw's going to have to shake off that playoff bug that has been bugging him the past few seasons. But if they can pitch up to their normal standards, I can't see anyone beating them in the National League.
Question. I was thinking, if the Dodgers make it as far as the World Series for whatever reason, and hopefully somebody else takes out the Cardinals before they have to face them, in Game 1 of the World Series, assuming production remains similar for the rest of the year, would they start Greinke or Kershaw?
It's going to depend on the previous series. Oh my goodness, I said I shouldn't do that.
I've been saying a lot of but you think, secret audience, I cut out a lot of the ums. So you might think that we're actually really smart people when we're not much better than most of the sports voices you hear on your TV. In fact, we're worse.
Significantly. Now, it's going to depend on the previous series because there isn't much of a gap between the championship series and the World Series in baseball. So, whoever's pitching a potential 7th game will likely need a lot of rest before the first game of a World Series. Conventional wisdom says you give the ball to your best pitcher in the 7th game. So if that happens, then I'm guessing Greinke is going to start the first game of a World Series. Now, if you don't have that sort of worry, you have to give the ball to your best pitcher. And even though Greinke's been pitching out of his mind this year, Kershaw's the one that's making the big bucks. He's being paid more than any other player in Major League Baseball. He was the Cy Young winner and the MVP from the previous season. He is the face of the most expensive franchise in Major League Baseball. It would be an injustice if he did not get the ball in the first game of the World Series, despite his issues come playoff time.
Yeah, and I think Kershaw is also the pitcher more likely to pitch a longer or more amount of pitches in a game because he doesn't throw quite as hard as Greinke. And I think Greinke said before that he prefers to not pitch more than 100 pitches. Obviously, come playoff time, things change. But that's what I really want to see this year as a Dodger fan. I want to see Greinke and Kershaw in the playoffs. And I want some runs because the Dodgers started off this year with runs all over the place, more runs than they knew what to do with. And then, everybody got in a slump. Jock Peterson, the hot rookie, started to get figured out a little bit. Although I believe he will be starting in center field for the All-Star game.
A pretty great accomplishment for the young rookie.
Yeah, at 20 homers so far this year.
Not bad.
Yeah, like some people look at him and he's like, 220 batting average. What's he doing starting? But Jock Peterson is more than batting average, and Dodger fans are very happy to have him.
Peterson's on-base percentage is more than adequate for a leadoff man, and his home runs at the top of the order are very attractive.
And so, come playoff time, should your Mets get there, probably by wild card, although the division race is getting tighter with the Nationals.
The Mets are 1 down in the wild card and 2 in the division, but the Nationals had so much pitching, they're bound to pull away.
There are a lot of really good teams in the National League.
Yeah.
Cardinals, Pirates, Dodgers, Nationals.
For the first time that I can remember, the National League is significantly better than the American League this year. I can't remember the last time that was the case.
Well, who were the top dogs in the American League in the regular season last year? Was it the Angels?
The A's and the Royals were kind of the surprises, although the A's dropped off precipitously. The Angels, I believe, had the best record in the American League. I think they had 97 wins. The Orioles won their division. They were pretty good, probably around 93, 94 wins. The American League was actually very good last year. The National League, you had the Cardinals, who were very good. The Nationals, once again, had a fantastic regular season, dropped off in the playoffs, and the Giants had Madison Bumgarner, and that seemed to be the end. And it's crazy because regardless of your analysis, regardless of any sort of prediction, any sort of hunch or feeling or emotion, the entirety of the 2014 Major League Baseball season came to the fact that Madison Bumgarner was superhuman. One guy was the definition of an entire Major League Baseball season, and not from what he did in the regular season, but from what he did in 5 or 6 starts in the playoffs.
And that's why people like to rag on Kershaw, because Kershaw hasn't had that. And not like every great pitcher has to have a Madison Bumgarner performance, because that is a singular standout performance that I don't think anyone's going to duplicate for a little while at least. But, I really, getting back to your Vets, should they make like a wild card game or something like that? How far do you think they could go?
Oh boy. Let's assume they win the wild card game. That means they're facing the best team in the National League, which means they're probably up against the Cardinals. They'll probably lose in 4. I don't see the Mets going very far because what's an interesting stat I recently read, the Mets, I believe, are 33-2 this year when they score 4 runs or more. And the average in Major League Baseball is like 3.98 runs per game per team. So if the Mets play an average pitching game, they are likely to win. But their offense is just so terrible. It's so bad.
They are in a good streak right now, but it is a streak.
This is a freaky streak. And their last 18 runs, I believe, have been scored via the home run, which is absurd considering the Mets are dead last in the league in home runs, dead last in runs scored in general. It's been a very fascinating turn of events to see the Mets essentially play 500 baseball because their pitching is so dominant and their hitting is so egregiously awful.
Now, I remember after we got back from the game, you were talking with your dad about you feel like the Mets will probably end up, and you think this is a good thing, trading a couple of their young arms for a franchise player like Yasiel Puig.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember your dad was very, very opposed to that.
Yeah. He grew up in the mid-'80s when the New York Mets won in a very similar fashion. They hit semi-well, but their recipe for success was their starting staff. And this starting staff is looking incredible. 5 or 6 power arms that are all under 25 years of age. They all have starting stuff. And yet, that's not good enough in the playoffs because the Mets hitting is so egregiously terrible. Now, one thing that's limiting the Mets right now is the Bernie Madoff scandal. They don't have the funds to really go out
But they
and
tied up a
sign
lot of
free
money
agents.
in Bernie Madoff?
They lost a lot of money in the Bernie Madoff scandal.
Well, who's their player that didn't play for them at all that they're still playing?
This
They're
is
still paying
connected.
every
This
year.
is Bobby Bonilla, the $5 million he was owed in 1999. They bought out his contract by paying him $1 million for the next 25 years. Now, at the time, this was a solid move for the Mets organization because they used the money they saved on Bobby Bonilla's $5 million contract to invest in Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme. And they were
A
getting
solid investment.
they were getting the returns they wanted for a few years until it all blew up in their face. And now they are paying Bobby Bonilla $1 million a year to be a retired baseball player, and they will do so for the next 9 years because the Mets are funny.
That's got to be is as far as like stories go that are funny and sad at the same time. That's pretty good.
Did you know that 2 years ago, Bobby Bonilla was the highest paid Mets outfielder?
The highest paid Mets
The
outfielder,
highest paid
who
Mets
I believe
outfielder.
never even played a single game for the Mets.
No, he did. He played from 95 to 98.
Okay, so
He did.
a few seasons. Baseball, it's so much more fun than what most people think it is. And not in the like objective sense, because you watch a baseball game on TV, even if you go to a game, there's not much happening for long stretches of time. There's a lot of pauses. Seemingly the same thing happens over and over again. But I don't know, like, I've gotten hooked on baseball, and I'm so happy that it's happened, because I used to just discount baseball and think of it as like, oh, that's something like only old people like. But I really think baseball has appeal for young people, and I really like watching baseball, and I am getting to like this time of year quite a lot because there's a lot of time for baseball.
Baseball's very sick right now. The main issue is that there's not very much national appeal. Locally, baseball does fantastically. The Texas Rangers do very well in Dallas. The Angels and the Dodgers do very well in Los Angeles. They make a lot of money with local cable deals, and that in turn makes it look like these teams are a big success. But the national ratings don't even scratch the surface of what the NBA or the NFL get. And that is a problem, because if you lose your national audience, you're going to lose the investment that you get from ESPN and Fox and TBS. And that's where the real money towards the league comes in. If you lose those channels, you lose a lot of your funding, and baseball probably can't survive without the cable money that's coming in. Now, all of those arguments might be rendered ineffective considering the sea change of how viewers are consuming American television, what with cord cutting and Netflix and Hulu and HBO on demand, we might be seeing a similar thing happening in live sports. But for right now, the idea that the Dodgers can sign a 25-year contract worth $20 billion is sort of misleading the American public who thinks that baseball is in a healthy place right now. It's not.
Well, and, to add on to that, youth participation in baseball is not what it once was. Youth soccer is getting really big. Youth basketball is getting really big. And, youth participation in football is going down, and baseball's not getting those kids. They're going to soccer and basketball for the most part. And, every sport starts with the little kids playing t-ball, playing pickup games, playing, in their backyards. And baseball is very much a backyard kind of game that you can do wherever as long as you have a bat and a ball. So, and you look at the major leagues now, most of the players are American, but it's not trending that way.
No.
A lot of the players are coming from Latin America these days. A lot of great players out of Cuba, Dominican Republic, even a few guys from Mexico, if I'm not misinformed.
Of course.
And, people like to call baseball America's pastime. It still is, I would assume, if you really take the word pastime and apply like a strict definition of something that harkens back to the old days and rivaled only by boxing, maybe, and horse racing sometimes. And it's certainly not that way anymore. And I bet there's a lot of people who are nostalgic for that kind of thing. And it's not going to be that way ever again. But, baseball will always be around. And so I just enjoy baseball a lot. And I'm really happy with how I'm enjoying baseball. But like you, I do worry about baseball's future.
Yeah, I'm glad you're enjoying it. It's a very worthwhile sport to follow. It's my speed. I get headaches watching hockey. I get headaches watching football. I like a slower game where you can sit down and cook something and talk to someone while it's going on in the background. I always say that baseball is, at worst, good background noise. And I think it's something that should be kept in the American public because the story of baseball is very much the story of this country, and it's important to keep that legacy alive. But we don't have to talk about baseball anymore. It's the first half is over, and it's nice to see it coming to a close. Is there anything else that's been piquing your interest, been blowing up your Reddit-curated Twitter feed?
Well, the Women's World Cup was obviously a huge deal. Had the highest rated soccer game for men or women when the final was on. Happened to be on at a very fortuitous time for American viewers, the day after for the 4th of July in the afternoon. And the USA, even, I learned this because I thought people would kind of tune out once it was apparent that we were thrashing Japan. But people kept tuning in during the whole game.
Yeah, but I mean, come on. How much of that is USA?
Yes.
USA.
I also read an interesting article. One of my favorite sports subreddits is a pretty small one. Reddit's MLS. Has about 40,000 subs, but has a lot of good discussion and a lot of good articles submitted. And I saw one there that said that soccer is fast becoming America's #1 patriotic sport. Because when you think about it, our other #1 sports, basketball, we're just too damn good at it.
Yep.
And we beat everybody, and we like seeing that.
Yep.
But really only when the Olympics rolls around. And we like seeing that because we see our favorite players just beat everybody.
Yep.
But that doesn't generate long-term, week after week, month after month interest. Baseball, we don't have the participation of our best players. The World Baseball Classic is around, but I think you told me a little while ago that the World Baseball Classic might not be around for much longer.
Yeah, the World Baseball Classic is beloved in almost every participating country except for the United States, which is a problem because the United States organizes the event, and if you don't get the same viewership in the country where the event is organized, they might just cancel the entire thing. What I'm hoping is that Major League Baseball just passes along the event to Japan, so the Nippon Professional Baseball League could organize it and continue this wonderful tradition. It's my favorite tournament to watch. I love watching it.
Haven't you seen a game at Dodger Stadium before?
Yes, I was at the semifinal and at the final.
We thought we were done with baseball, but this is different because it's international competition.
Well, I thought we were done.
And football does have international competition. You may be surprised. In fact, it was on ESPN 3
Why?
today. Because, I mean, there are countries who like it. And
It's silly.
Japan, apparently, likes it a lot. Germany and Austria are okay at it. It is kind of silly to see America
How
playing.
much of these are army brats or sons of army brats?
Well, that's where the Germans and the Japanese come from. Certainly Japanese, but I mean that's how baseball got big in Japan.
I guess.
So, but in soccer, it's kind of the perfect storm to build huge interest because we're a pretty big player on the international stage.
On the women's side.
Well, on the women's side, we're the top dog. On the men's side, we get to the World Cup every time.
Yeah.
We're consistently in the top 20 or 30 teams in the world.
Middling.
Yes, but consistently middling.
Okay.
And not middling in the sense that the English are, because I believe that the American team has a better record in international competitions than England does now. Sorry, England, but you're probably sorry for yourselves because you're England.
Come on, England!
Oh, yeah, that was hard watching them in the Women's World Cup lose like that. That was...
It was, well, yeah, that was a really tough way for her to go out. But I do appreciate how the English fans rallied around her. The English media was very tolerable of her, I guess, misery, because that's going to haunt her for the rest of her life. If she's any self-respecting athlete, she is going to
yeah, you could see it in her face.
And there's nothing she could do about it. That was the right play made on the ball, just an inch or two to the left or right, and that ball clears the goal, and she's all good. She makes the heroic play to save the game for England. Now, this is interesting. This is something that Dan Le Batard pointed out, so I cannot take credit for this. But imagine that same scenario happening for the men's side during the Men's World Cup. That player gets crucified, and we've seen this happen before. The Colombian team with Escobar, who had the own goal in the World Cup in '94 at the Rose Bowl, he died. He was assassinated. Not necessarily because of that, but he came back to Colombia afterwards, and he died essentially for his mistake. Now, this is the one time for her mistake, instead of being torn apart, has been beneficial for the woman. I can't think of a time, at least in sports media, where our inherent prejudice between men's athletics and women's athletics has actually benefited women, especially at the FIFA World Cup, which has so harmed the reputation of women's soccer for their gendered nonsense. It's really fascinating to see how that played out.
Yeah, and that moment really captured why international soccer is the most popular international sport, not just because it's by default the most popular sport, period, but also because things like that can happen, and one little moment can define a game because, it's so low scoring, it's so tactical. And, that's one of the reasons that article I was reading said that Americans are getting on board with international soccer on both the men's and the women's side because we're not the best, at least on the men's side. And on the women's side, it's, when one team does well, it benefits the other. So the women did really well in the World Cup. They got a record viewings for the men's team in the CONCACAF Gold Cup.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of feed off one another in that way.
They do.
It's getting real big, and I love watching soccer. I love going to soccer games. I don't go to enough of them, but they're a lot of fun, and I really would like to see a USA soccer game sometime.
That would be a lot of fun. They play down in the Rose Bowl occasionally. They might have them swing in sometime.
I got to say, though, my favorite sports viewing experience so far was when I got to see the Portland Timbers play last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you guys ever watched a Portland Timbers game on TV, but they have amazing fans who really go all out for every game. And their team is not great, but they do amaze sometimes, and it's quite a lot of fun. And I do suggest that wherever you are, if you've got a Major League Soccer team near you, or even a North American Soccer League team, or a North American Women's Soccer League team, which many of them are co-tenants with MLS teams, go see them because they're not nearly as expensive as basketball or football games, and they're a little more high paced and high intensity than baseball. And you really feel like the fans are there and they play a part because the most fans do in basketball is chant defense, and the most fans do in football is yell really loud. So being part of like an organized supporters group is quite a unique experience in American sports, and I think something that we don't get enough of. Because I've seen footage from Europe where basketball is pretty big too, and like in basketball derbies in like Serbia, and the crowds will have chants and stuff like that, and people get really into it. I kind of wish our basketball games were a little more like that.
Yeah, but you see flares and smoke bombs inside basketball arenas.
I didn't say we had to go that far.
I, for one, am glad that we have the relatively peaceful atmosphere in American sports that does not happen around the world. For instance, there was recently a tournament game in Argentina between the two most popular teams in Buenos Aires, River Plate and Boca Juniors. They were at Boca Juniors, and the River Plate players did not go out on the field at the beginning of the second half because some of Boca Juniors fans had penetrated the security wall and sprayed River Plate players with pepper spray. That doesn't happen in the United States. I'm glad it doesn't happen in the United States because this is not something that is unique to Argentina. This happens everywhere in Europe, everywhere in South America. Fans die watching soccer, and that doesn't happen in American football.
And which is one of the reasons why I really like MLS, because I believe they strike an excellent balance because they have active supporter sections and they chant and they're passionate, but they don't start riots, they don't beat people, and they're not assholes.
But the product is mediocre.
It's mediocre if you compare it to Champions League soccer.
Yes.
Yes. But the product is not, they're not playing against Champions League teams in Europe. They're playing against each other, and there's quite a lot of parity, and I believe it's quite fun, although MLS does suffer from long season-itis a bit. But once the playoffs roll around, you better tune in, because that's a ton of fun.
But, I mean, one reason Americans like American leagues so much is because there's this inherent understanding that every American sports league is the best one in the world. There's no place hockey players would rather play than the NHL, no baseball players would rather play than the MLB, no players of basketball than the NBA, no football players would rather play anywhere but the NFL. The MLS is not that destination, and I understand its rising in popularity. I understand it's at a healthy standpoint 20 years later. But, man, I hate to sound like the typical American fan, but I'm not going to watch it if it's not the best.
Well, you are entitled to that opinion, sir. But I quite like, even though I do take in Champions League soccer whenever I can see it, because it is on quite a lot on national TV. By the way, if you're American and you get NBC Sports Network, you get more Premier League games than the English do. You can watch all of them online, and they have a lot of them on TV. Fox has the UEFA Champions League. You can get plenty of that as an American, and that's great to watch. But I think a lot of MLS fans take pride in supporting local clubs, and clubs you can actually go out and see and be part of the experience. And while not being the best does turn off a lot of people, I think that people who do enjoy it really enjoy it for what it is and want it to grow, but they're not under any delusions as to, there's not a lot of MLS fans that will go around talking about how MLS is the best league in the world, because they know it's not, but they also know that they really love it, and they love being there, and they love supporting local teams and American teams. and it's got a special appeal to it. Like, unfortunately for the Portland Timbers, there's a player called Robbie Rogers on the LA Galaxy. He starts at left back for them. He's a great, consistent starter. And the LA Galaxy recently had Pride Night, which happened to be just after the Supreme Court's historic ruling legalizing same-sex marriage in all states in the U.S.
It's just marriage now.
Ha ha ha. It is just marriage. That is true. I shouldn't ha 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 at that. That is very true. No gay marriage, just marriage. And so Robbie Rogers is the only openly gay professional soccer player in the entire world that's a man.
Mm-hmm.
And he scored a goal against my poor Portland Timbers, who gave up 5 goals that night and didn't score any, on Pride Night. And there were tons of pride flags in the stands, and he was really emotional. And I really, really like that MLS is making those moments, because there's a bringing new fans in, and it's just top quality entertainment.
That's dope. That's the sort of American thing that I like. And that brings me to my next point, because surely you'll have to agree, there's enough American stuff in the MLS to support it as an American institution. They have to drop their European paint job. I don't like that there's a team called Real Salt Lake and Sporting Kansas City. I don't like that NYCFC, the terribly named NYCFC, by the way, is borrowing chants from their sister club at Manchester in order to seem more European. The scarves are fine. I guess the logos are fine, but man, there's no reason to try to pretend like you're European.
Yeah,
we fought a revolution to stop being European.
That does, and a lot of MLS fans will agree with you, especially since Atlanta is getting a team in 2017, and they just decided on the name. You know, there were a lot of great name submissions, like Phoenix, or like the Atlanta Phoenix, or like the Atlanta Silverbacks, or like a lot of cool names like that. They just ended up with Atlanta FC.
Stop!
And we're just like, okay, like, we get it. Sometimes FC works, but the best names and brands in MLS, like Portland Timbers, who have been around since like the 70s, by the way. Seattle Sounders, also been around in some form for a long time.
What's wrong with the New York Cosmos?
Yes, the New York Cosmos, the old Metro Stars before they came to the New York Red Bulls.
Ugh.
LA Galaxy, which was 90s and, you know,
it's cheesy, yeah.
90s and cheesy, but they've grown into it.
It's American, yeah.
And I hope that FC trend in MLS kind of goes away, because it's a little annoying.
We don't call it football. We don't have football clubs. We have soccer teams. You know what would be cool? Atlanta ST, soccer team.
Well, there are a few SCs, but I get your point, and that's something which is it's beautiful in the MLS, because they're so young. They still have a lot to sort out. Players' rights are not nearly what they are in the other leagues.
The favoritism towards big city teams is appalling in the MLS.
Yeah, it's and also the behind the scenes stuff is like, if you think the NFL's vague behind the scenes, then just look at MLS for a while. But fans are understanding that it's a young product with special needs, but they're also hopeful that it will grow to being not just self-sustaining, which it is, but also self-respecting and an institution that kids in America really look up to. And so that's your weekly, almost weekly, monthly, whenever we feel like doing this podcast.
Yeah.
My soapbox for the MLS, which I believe I've done on every single podcast we've done so far.
Congratulations, Shayla.
So, Cristiano.
That's me.
Ronaldo.
No.
Have you been watching much besides baseball lately?
I did watch a couple things recently. I watched Boyhood last night. I didn't really like it. But this morning I watched the Wimbledon final. And there's...
Serena won, right?
No, men's final.
Oh,
men's
Djokovic.
Final. Yeah, Djokovic beat Federer. I could go on a rant about how much I hate the elitism of Wimbledon, but instead I want to focus on something I found rather fascinating. And I've known this for a couple of years, but I studied it a little more intently this year. When Djokovic faces Federer, especially in London, the crowd leans towards Federer. Now, this happens for a number of reasons. Federer is portrayed as a very nice guy. He's also potentially the greatest tennis player that we've ever seen. He married his high school girlfriend. He does a lot of charitable work. He stays out of the press, and his English is very good. Djokovic, on the other hand, well, he stays out of controversy as well. He does some brash things. He grunts while he hits, while Federer doesn't. He is a much more aggressive player. Federer is very fluid with his movements. And Djokovic also does things like go out clubbing at 3 a.m. before big matches and buy the entire world's supply of donkey cheese, which doesn't endear English fans as much as Federer's antics do. But when it comes down to it, I'm still not entirely sure why the British are supporting Federer so much and do this so often, considering that Federer is from Switzerland, Djokovic is from Serbia, which, to me, are equally as different than England.
No. Switzerland, while being very different from England in that they don't speak the same language, no same money, a different culture, certainly. Serbia, it has only really started to integrate with Europe kind of fairly recently, while Switzerland, while not joining any EU or anything like that, have been integrated with Europe, Western Europe, a very, very long time. And Serbia is still regarded as a backwater by Western Europeans. So I understand why they would root for Federer over Djokovic. And just because, Federer's looks nicer than Djokovic.
He's prettier. Yeah, he's very pretty.
So the women's final hasn't happened yet?
No, it has. Serena won.
Well, Serena won, yes.
And not much to talk about. Serena, greatest, most dominant athlete I've ever seen. It's that simple.
You just said Roger Federer was.
No. Best men's tennis player of all time, I think. When it is all said and done, I do think it'll be Federer over Bjorn Borg, over Jimmy Connors. But in terms of the women's game, Serena Williams, she's in her mid-30s, and she's won 28 straight matches. She has won 4 straight Grand Slams, and she's 1 away from 5 and the annual Grand Slam, which has only been done once by Steffi Graf. Really impressive stuff coming from Serena Williams. And we've been seeing this sort of consistent impressiveness for 17 years. This is nothing new for Serena. This isn't Michael Jordan's 6 years of dominance. This is a decade of being the best.
Yeah, and in an individual sport like tennis, you really, if you're that good, you really get the opportunity to showcase your talents. And she's doing it very, very well. And she has a very strong brand and tons of fans, and she's fun to watch. Speaking of women's country club kind of sports, I watched the Women's Golf Open today, called by the wonderful Joe Buck and the rest of the people at Fox. It was a great finish until the end. A 20-year-old won the competition, a Korean girl who came out of almost nowhere and birdied a lot of the holes on the back nine, bogeyed the last one, and had to sit biting her nails in the clubhouse for her next nearest competitor to finish. But she won, and it was great because it's so, women's golf is so, it's kind of strange in a way, because like almost everybody's either Korean or Japanese, and like the sponsors are different. I noticed that if you've ever been to a Dodger games, you know what Hype beer is. It's that Korean beer they sell at Dodger games. That's her sponsor, but she's not old enough to drink in America, so I thought that was kind of funny. And she only spoke very little English, but you could tell that it was a big deal for her because she won the U.S. Open at 20, and Jordan Spieth couldn't even do that. So that was a really fun thing to watch, and I'm glad I did watch it. I do watch a good bit of golf. I try to catch most of the majors. I think golf has a lot of tension, especially when it comes down to Sunday.
There's nothing you can say to make me interested in golf.
I'm telling you what I think about golf. Thank you very much.
I'm going to host a podcast one of these days. It's going to be called Fuck Golf. I hate golf so much. On principle. Not necessarily as a sports product, because I can understand some of the appeal. I understand why people like watching Tiger Woods. I understand why people like the physics and the geometry, and people like looking at lush green settings. But golf is elitist and dumb.
Yes, very much so. Very elitist, very dumb, and played by a lot of ignorant people. And I remember a bunch of ignorant morons thought that Tiger Woods' dominance would bring a bunch of young black kids in playing golf. Ha ha ha, very funny, not a chance. But I like watching golf just because for the product they put on the course. And I like that little bit of tension, and I don't know, I'm kind of a sports junkie. I watch just about every sport thing that there is. Uh, Question for you before we end the podcast. Do you think of combat sports like the UFC or boxing? Are you morally opposed to them?
Man, you know what? On principle, I'd like to think that people should pursue whatever they want to do as long as there is a quote unquote safe way to do it and as long as it isn't harming other people. And I understand that there are people in this world that are born aggressive. They are born to be fighters. They are born to be gladiators. And that is their place and that is what they want to do. On the other hand, I think that unfortunately we have this really combative mentality in the American DNA that likes to put boxers and fighters in the UFC on a pedestal, which makes those competitors far more appealing than they should be. I think those who box and those who fight should be a very niche group of the population who wouldn't be happy doing anything else. Instead, we have elevated these people into our gladiators who make a lot of money, they get a lot of endorsements and fame.
I wouldn't say endorsements. Floyd Mayweather has no endorsements at all.
He's also the richest athlete in the world. You can see the appeal of boxing simply by watching Floyd Mayweather be a terrible human being and get paid $50 million a year for being a terrible human being. So, with that said, I can't say that I would advocate for the destruction of combat sports. I think much like drug use or abortion or other hard topics to talk about in this country, combat sports are going to exist no matter what we do with them. People have been fighting for millennia. However, I do think we broadcast it too much. I do think we put too much emphasis on the glory of fighting instead of the niche appeal for those aggressive people. I would not let my children box under any circumstances. I would not let my children fight under any circumstance. And I would push that same agenda for most parents as well.
Interesting take on it, because I remember I just saw Fox had some UFC prelims for one of the big fights on their channel, so I was about to turn on when my dad was like, turn that off, I don't want to watch that. And I was just kind of curious about it, but he's very morally opposed to combat sports. So I just wanted to hear your take on that. I think that's about our show.
Yeah.
Christian, what is your sports event to watch this coming week?
Not necessarily an event. I would plug the Home Run Derby, but I'm not too excited about the format this year. HBO movie called 7 Days in Hell starring Andy Samberg. It looks to be really funny.
Is that about tennis?
Yes.
I did hear something about that.
I mean, the premise is Andy Samberg's character is the adopted brother of the Williams sisters and develops into this John McEnroe type tennis player, and with guest appearances by the Williams sisters and John McEnroe and a lot of other famous tennis people looking like they have a good time making fun of themselves. So DVR it. Don't watch Ballers because it's not very good. Watch that instead.
Oh, I hadn't heard a review of Ballers yet.
It's not great. I was interested because the principal man behind it is Peter Berg, who is behind Friday Night Lights, which is my favorite sports movie of all time, my favorite sports TV show of all time. But it's not very good. It's The Rock being a good actor amongst very poor actors.
Yeah, that's funny. The Rock is a much better actor than a lot of people give him credit for. Lots of screen charisma.
Most wrestlers, very good actors.
Okay, so that's just about our show. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening to baseball and golf and whatever else we have to talk about, because we talk about what we want to talk about, and we're not going to apologize about that to anybody who's given us, the business.
All three of you.
You ever seen that video clip when, I can't remember, some player on the Jets gets up on Jim Kelly and starts punching him. Like, he sacks him, and then he starts punching him. And then the ref's like, that's a 15-yard penalty. He's giving him the business down there. And that's one of my favorite football clips of all time, because nowadays, if a defensive player punched a quarterback repeatedly, he'd be booted out of the freaking league.
He would be guillotined.
But even though the ref was like, he's giving him the business, like, it was a routine 15-yard penalty. Oh my God, I love that clip. I have to show you that after this podcast is over. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Little B's gonna play us out.
Thank you, Base God.
Base God.
Sit back.
Fuck golf.
Let me tell a little story. I used to love sports, baseball and basketball. Actually, I lied. I hated baseball. I love basketball and football. Running track. Yes, sir, run it back. All day sports was the best thing. Madden 09.